Old wounds die hard, as they say. And in this video, what I wanted to do is go over some old wounds that have been kind of addressed, kind of brought back from the dead, because when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, there are two people in this organization that have been a part of the Columbus Blue Jackets as far back as, let's say, last season. Of course, today we are talking about Patrik Laine, the player that was acquired from Columbus in a pretty big trade a few weeks ago, and we're also talking about the Blue Jackets' former head coach, the guy who was put into the main coaching position after the Mike Babcock fiasco of last year. It was honestly kind of embarrassing seeing how that whole thing went down, but either way, today we're talking about Pascal Vincent, former Blue Jackets head coach and former Patrik Laine head coach as well. Because when it comes to both of these guys, not only have they found themselves away from Columbus, but they are now both in the Montreal Canadiens organization. Patrik Laine is of course a player with the team, and Pascal Vincent, who was a part of the Blue Jackets coaching staff for a few years before being their head coach in 2023-2024, is now the Laval Rocket head coach. These guys, Laine and Vincent, both were a part of the Blue Jackets for a few years, and now they're on Montreal. With this in mind, there was an article published on TVA Sports earlier yesterday by Jonathan Bernier, wherein Pascal Vincent talks about how he and Patrik Laine have gotten along in the past. There are things that will remain private, Pascal Vincent says, as he praises Laine and refuses to live in the past. This article will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read it yourself, but long story short, the reason why I think this is noteworthy to talk about is because for Patrik Laine, he definitely isn't a guy who has had the easiest time in the National Hockey League. A few of his years in Winnipeg were tarnished with a few reports of maybe guys in the locker room not really treating him all too right, and then there were issues to his own production and whether or not that was also a big problem to make note of. And when he went over to Columbus, the first season that Laine had wasn't really all too great with the team either. There were some growing pains that he had exhibited as a member of that organization. It took a while for Patrik Laine to actually become an effective player, and then, in the most previous season that he had, things weren't really all too great either. He was out of the lineup for the majority of the season because of his time in the NHL's Players Assistance Program, as well as his time off due to injury. And when he was playing, he wasn't particularly great either. So with all this in mind, Pascal Vincent is kind of the guy who was there pretty much since the beginning. When Patrik Laine was traded to Columbus, Pascal Vincent shortly got hired the summer after. So it had been a few years of Vincent being in the coaching staff of Columbus, and then one season of him being the main head coach whilst Laine was on the team. With this in mind, let's go back over to the article published by Jonathan Bernier, and no, it's not Jonathan Bernier the goaltender, it's the writer from TVA Sports. The situation caused quite a stir last year when Pascal Vincent scratched Patrik Laine from the Blue Jackets lineup. It's understandable. After all, it's not every day that a star player watches his teammates from the bridge. 2 games earlier, on November 16, Pascal Vincent had left the Finn hanging around on the bench for the last 10 minutes of a game against the Arizona Coyotes. And so, you can tell just some of the other drama that was introduced into this situation here too. Patrik Laine was scratched by Pascal Vincent in 2023. That situation, he says it was embarrassing. That was in November of last year. Pascal Vincent also benched Laine for a pretty significant amount of time in a game against the Arizona Coyotes. And shortly after this, Patrik Laine did take the rest of the season off because he was in the NHL's Players Assistance Program. I'm not saying those two events are linked, I'm just saying that that's the timeline of the events here. Either way, the article brings this up and then talks about what Pascal Vincent has to say about that now. Present at the opening of the Canadiens rookie camp in his capacity as head coach of the Laval Rocket, Pascal Vincent timidly returned to the incident. "We made a decision as an organization," he had explained. "There are things that happened that we will keep private, but I learned that communication is very important." Moreover, against Arizona, Pascal Vincent had practically reserved the same fate for Johnny Gaudreau. He had sent him onto the ice only once in the second half of the third period. R.I.P. Johnny Gaudreau first and foremost, but secondly, the article is bringing up Gaudreau's name in this capacity because it's saying that, hey, Pascal Vincent wasn't giving Laine any specifically harsh treatment. He wasn't going out there and targeting Laine. He was treating other players like this too, not really playing them as much and benching them in the third period. Gaudreau got the same treatment after all. The next part of the article is pretty interesting too. Despite their current disagreements, Pascal Vincent did not hesitate to praise the Finn. Patrik is probably the most talented player I've ever coached. I've rarely seen a guy who can help a team like he can, he said. He's an incredible acquisition for the Montreal Canadiens. Now pause. That's really interesting. Is Laine a more talented player than Johnny Gaudreau? Who else has Pascal Vincent been able to coach in his time in the NHL? Well, he was a part of the Blue Jackets organization for a few years. He wasn't there when Panarin was a Blue Jacket, nor when Dubois was a Blue Jacket. I don't know who else there really is to compare him to, other than Johnny Gaudreau. I don't know about that, man. I think Johnny's probably got to step up here on Patrik Laine. Obviously, though, if the Montreal Canadiens acquired the 8th wonder of the world, one is entitled to wonder why a divorce was necessary with the Jets and the Blue Jackets. So, it's talking about Patrik Laine's history, and if he is that good, he is that talented, why has he been traded away twice before? Sometimes it's a matter of timing, Pascal Vincent said. He was very good in Winnipeg early on. It was going very well, said the 52-year-old hockey player, who at the time was the head coach of the Manitoba Moose, the Jets farm team. In Columbus, he had some good moments, it's just that the moments weren't as consistent. There, I think he is sincerely excited to play here. He wants to play hockey. He wants to perform. He likes the group. He is smiling. And I think that also does have to do with some of the external circumstances that Pascal Vincent admittedly doesn't really talk about in this article. He says that in Columbus there were some things that happened that he will keep private between him and Laine. But for Winnipeg, he's not really talking about some of the other stuff. I mean, there were some reported ideas floating around as to whether or not guys like Blake Wheeler, for example, were bullying quote-unquote Patrik Laine. I'm not going to direct you to a video of ours that we had made about those ideas because it was just so long ago, but it wasn't squeaky peachy clean with Laine and the way he was apparently perceived by other players and people in the Winnipeg Jets organization at that time frame. And you have to wonder if that's pretty much a big reason as to why his production declined and his goal scoring slowed down. Either way, Pascal Vincent does give Laine his props and says, yeah, he was good at the start of his Winnipeg career. Things kind of fell apart, but then in Columbus, there were a bit more consistency issues that presented themselves, which honestly I think is kind of astounding when you consider the fact that he was a point-per-game guy for 2 seasons in a row in Columbus. Sure, he didn't play the full 82 games in both of those years, but he was good enough to cement himself as a legitimately good player, and one that Pascal Vincent said is potentially the most talented player he himself has ever coached. Speaking about players that he had coached, the bottom of the article goes out there and talks about, on a more somber note, the Pascal Vincent response to Johnny Gaudreau. We had brought his name up a bunch in this video because of his play on the Columbus Blue Jackets. Like everyone who has been a part of the Blue Jackets organization over the past few seasons, Pascal Vincent was devastated by the tragic deaths of Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau. I listened to his wife say that he never spoke against anyone. It's so true. He's such a good person. He was a family guy. He was a guy with good values. He was super humble. Under Vincent, Gaudreau led the Blue Jackets in scoring, although it was one of the most difficult seasons in terms of production. This morning, someone asked me what it was like to be his coach. I would say it was too easy. Johnny Gaudreau never complained. There were games where I played him less, where I was a little bit difficult with him. He didn't say a word. The next day, he was even better. I would have put him on the 4th line, he would have said it was no problem, and he would have played on the 4th line, he continued. He was the kind of guy that everyone liked. I feel very lucky to have met him. Admittedly, the article takes a very interesting turn from talking about Patrik Laine to just shifting 180 degrees and talking about Gaudreau, but this also kind of bleeds into what we were talking about at the beginning, how Pascal Vincent said, yeah, sometimes I'd play Gaudreau on the 4th line. And obviously, when you think about it, Johnny Gaudreau is a top-tier superstar player. Like, okay, the fact that he was on the 4th line tells you a lot as to what Pascal Vincent was doing as the coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, and Patrik Laine ended up suffering some of those same consequences. Now, I'm not going to say that all of those things were undeserved. Did Patrik Laine play in a capacity that warranted him getting benched or even scratched? I'm not going to go out there and comment on things from a year ago, but at the end of the day, Pascal Vincent did do his own commentating on those moments in this recent interview, and I thought it was interesting enough to go out there and highlight this all in a video here. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Pascal Vincent re-digging these old wounds with Patrik Laine, and how his time in Columbus came to a very odd and awkward end because of a season that didn't really pan out in the ways that we thought it should? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.